Story number 1. This happened quite a while ago, but it still bothers me to this day. It was 2016. I was 22, my husband was 28, and we were moving into a rental house. I was 6 months pregnant, and we were genuinely excited. We'd been living in a pretty rough part of the city, so moving into a decent neighborhood felt like a real step up. We didn't know much about the place itself, just that it was in a good school district, had low crime rates, and actually fit our budget for a while. Everything seemed fine. No red flags, no problems. And before long, our son was born. The delivery went smoothly, and he slept well at the hospital. Sweet, peaceful, totally normal. That all changed the moment we brought him home. The first night was absolutely brutal. Every single time we put him in the bassinet, he would just scream, and not the kind of crying that means he's hungry or needs a diaper change. This was different. It sounded like he was in actual pain. My husband and I took turns through the night, one of us sleeping while the other watched him. My shift always started around 2 or 3 in the morning. Around the same time, I started having nightmares. Bad ones. Every night, I'd dream about my son getting hurt, or worse. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding. I eventually brought it up with my OB at my 6-week postpartum checkup, and she diagnosed me with postpartum anxiety. She prescribed medication and referred me to a therapist. I did everything she told me to, took the meds, went to the sessions, but weeks went by and nothing changed. The nightmares kept coming. My son kept screaming through the night. Our pediatrician told us it was colic and that we just had to ride it out. Then our son hit 3 months old and things got worse. The crying stopped being just a nighttime thing. It was all day now too, and then came that nightmare. One night, I dreamed I walked into my son's room and found him engulfed in flames, screaming. I was standing in the doorway, but my feet were frozen. I literally could not move, could not speak, could not do anything. I just stood there, watching him scream in agony. I woke up screaming, gasping for air. My husband ran in and tried to calm me down, but I was completely shaken. For the next few days, I couldn't sleep at all. I started spending most of my time at work during the day, and in the evenings, I'd sit out on the front porch just to get some air and clear my head. That's where I got to know our neighbor, this sweet elderly woman who had lived on that street since the neighborhood was first built back in the 70s. She must have noticed something was off, because one evening she looked at me and asked if I was okay. I hesitated, but eventually I opened up, sort of. I told her about my son's strange behavior and the fact that I'd been having terrible nightmares. She listened carefully and asked me to tell her more. I wasn't totally comfortable going into detail, so I kept it vague and just said I kept dreaming about the house catching fire. Her face changed instantly. 1 second, she looked concerned and warm, and the next, she looked genuinely horrified. There was this long silence, felt like it lasted forever, before she finally spoke. "Do you know what happened in this house?" she asked. I told her I had no idea. She let out a slow breath, looked down for a moment, then reached over and took my hand. She told me that a few years back, the house had caught fire. It was caused by faulty electrical wiring. The landlord had cut corners on the installation. A young family had been living there at the time. They had a baby, 3 months old. The baby didn't make it. The couple had moved away afterward. The house was repaired, and eventually it was put back on the rental market. I sat there completely frozen. Then I got up, walked straight inside, and grabbed my husband. I told him we needed to leave, right now. He must have seen something in my eyes, because he didn't ask any questions. He just started moving. It wasn't until we were in the car that I explained everything. What our neighbor had told me, what I'd been dreaming, and the gut feeling I couldn't shake that those nightmares had been a warning. That something was going to happen to our son if we stayed. Thankfully, my brother-in-law lived in the next town over, so we drove straight there. That night, our son slept through the entire night without making a single sound. I checked on him every hour, because honestly, after months of constant screaming, the silence felt wrong. I kept thinking something had to be off, but he was perfectly fine, just sleeping peacefully. From that point on, aside from the normal fussiness you'd expect from any baby, our son never screamed like that again. Not once. My husband went back to pack up our things, and we stayed with my brother-in-law until our lease ran out and we found a new place. I never set foot in that house again. I never will. I just pray for whoever moves in there next. Story number 2, I'm 27. My husband is 30, and our daughter just turned 1. This happened last night, so I've only slept about 2 hours, and my daughter decided this morning was absolutely not a morning for sleeping in. Anyway, here's my story. My husband, our 1-year-old daughter, and I have been living in this rental house for about 3 years now. When we first moved in, a doorbell randomly went off. Thing is, there's no doorbell anywhere in this house. We looked everywhere and couldn't find one. We figured there was probably a battery-powered doorbell tucked away in the attic somewhere, dying out or glitching. It stopped eventually, and we pretty much forgot about it. My husband also used to mention seeing what he called shadow figures, hearing footsteps, and having horrific sleep paralysis nightmares. Honestly, I always kind of blamed him for those. I wasn't sure if he was messing with me or trying to freak me out. But that was years ago, and in the whole year our daughter has been living here with us. Nothing weird happened until last night. My husband works nights, so most evenings, it's just me and the baby. Last night, our daughter woke up around midnight, so I brought her into bed with me. She fell back asleep pretty quickly, but I was wide awake, scrolling through Hulu trying to find something to watch. I'm dead serious. The foot of my bed suddenly lifted about 1.5 feet off the ground. There was a sound from the floor, and then it slammed back down hard. My daughter was still asleep, but I froze completely. My first thought was that someone was under the bed, but I immediately realized there's no way anyone could fit under there. It's way too low to the ground. Still, that wasn't exactly a comforting thought either. I scooped my daughter up football style, stood up on the mattress, jumped off the bed as far as I could, and bolted out of the room. I grabbed my gun, called my husband in tears, shaking, begging him to come home, then called my mom to come get us. We only have one car at the moment. Our kitchen is right next to the front door. The lights started flickering and then went completely out, and that was it for me. I carried my daughter outside to the front yard in nothing but a t-shirt and underwear and waited there until my husband got home about 10 minutes later. He went through the whole house and didn't find anything, which honestly scared me even more. I would have preferred finding an intruder under the bed over whatever invisible thing this was, but I still went to my mom's. I finally fell asleep around 3:30 in the morning, and my husband picked me up at 5 a.m. when his shift ended. I stayed up all night because I was too scared to sleep there. I genuinely don't know how I'm supposed to be alone in that house at night anymore. I've been trying to come up with a rational explanation, and I just can't. Maybe this doesn't sound that scary to some people, but I have never been that terrified in my life, and everything scary is multiplied by about 10 when you have a child you're responsible for protecting. What do I do? And how do you properly cleanse a house without making things worse? For the record, I don't drink or do any kind of drugs, so I wasn't impaired in any way. My mom is pretty knowledgeable about the paranormal. And my husband, after too many bad relationships and one too many horror movies, we made a pact early on that we'd always believe each other if something weird happened. So they both believe me, but I still feel like I'm losing my mind. Story number 3. I just got back from a week-long vacation last night, and now the same paranormal activity that happened at the place I stayed is apparently following me back to my apartment. I apologize in advance if this is a little scattered. I haven't slept much in the past week. The house we stayed at was beautiful. My entire extended family, 18 people, were all there, so the place had to be enormous. It was divided into 2 sections. The older part, which had a basement studio and 3 upstairs bedrooms, and a newer addition. I won't go into detail about the newer section because nothing weird happened there, but it was gorgeous. I shared a room with my girlfriend, and since we arrived last, we got stuck with the worst room in the house. Not only was it the smallest, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, but it was also on the older side of the house, right in front of the staircase that led down to the basement. Since I'd driven 6 hours that day, I was exhausted, so I said hi to everyone and basically went straight to bed. Around 11 p.m., my girlfriend and I turned in for the night, She's one of those infuriating people who falls asleep within 5 minutes anywhere, so she was out cold almost immediately. I, on the other hand, had this uncomfortable, creeping feeling in my chest. Not exactly fear, more like that heightened alertness you get when you feel like someone's watching you. To calm myself down, I pulled up YouTube. About an hour later, I noticed my girlfriend seemed to be having a nightmare, so I gently touched her hand to ease her out of it. The second I made contact, she jolted awake, screamed, mumbled something like ghost, and then immediately fell right back asleep. I was officially creeped out enough that I just kept watching YouTube. About 2 hours after that, she woke up again, screamed, and said something about footsteps right outside the door, then fell back asleep instantly. I decided I wasn't sleeping that night and went back to YouTube. Another hour passed. Then I looked over and saw my girlfriend sitting upright in bed, but she was still asleep. She shuffled to the edge of the mattress and started talking to the corner of the room. Eventually, she lay back down, but not before I was completely terrified. After that first night, the activity calmed down a little. The rest of the week, it was mostly creaking floorboards, knocking on the walls, and knocking on the door. One notable exception, the night before last, something sat down on the edge of my bed. My first thought was that my cat had jumped up. Then I remembered I wasn't home. I sat up just in time to see the indentation on the edge of the mattress rise back up. It couldn't have been my girlfriend. She was on the opposite side of the bed, nowhere near the spot. And that mattress was rock solid. You'd really have to press hard to make a dent like that. Fast forward to the drive home. Another sleepless night, a long day of driving, and I finally get back to my apartment. My girlfriend had plans with friends, so she was out for most of the night. I figured I'd finally get a break from all the creepy stuff. Then my dog Poppy and my cat Anna started tracking something moving around the apartment. The way their heads were moving, whatever they were watching was moving fast, darting around. I've seen them watch bugs before, but this was different. They didn't have that casual, half-interested vibe. They were locked in. Poppy started growling as whatever it was moved into a corner. Anna jumped up next to me on the sofa while Poppy growled at the corner and slowly backed toward me. After a full week of this garbage, I wasn't even scared anymore. I was just annoyed and exhausted because it kept messing with my sleep. Both Poppy and Anna tracked the thing as it moved out of the corner toward us, and Poppy started barking like crazy. I told her to stop, and then I heard a growl come from the middle of the room. It was pretty loud, kind of like a small dog, or weirdly, like a young girl. Based on the direction my pets were tracking it, whatever it was seemed small, fast, and apparently capable of jumping onto tables and counters. I stood up, stared in the direction it seemed to be, and said, "Please just leave." I felt chills and goosebumps in places I didn't even know could get goosebumps. I said it again, louder, firmer, and opened the front door to let it out. Whatever it was, it seemed agitated. It didn't appear to do anything, but I could see my pets tracking it as it moved toward the door. So I thought maybe it worked. About 2 minutes later, Poppy started barking at the corners near the front door, while Anna went on high alert, staring at the same spot. At that point, I just gave up and hoped it would leave me alone. It hadn't been violent, just deeply annoying. Eventually, Poppy fell asleep at my feet. Anna ran into the other room and kept poking her head out to stare into the living room before retreating again. I was completely done with it. I put on headphones to drown out the wall knocking and went back to YouTube. I decided I'd stay up until my girlfriend got home so I could tell her what was going on. But whatever this thing was, it took that opportunity to start poking me. Every 5 minutes or so, I'd feel something jab at me. My arms, my legs, my feet. Not hard, just persistent little pokes. After a while, it even poked me in the nose. I ignored it because I'd noticed that engaging with it only seemed to make things worse. The apartment also got noticeably colder, even though the thermostat read 72 degrees. Hours of knocking, poking, prodding, and the occasional touch later, my girlfriend finally walked through the door. The second she did, I knew it was gone. The unease lifted, the noises stopped. And I had one of the best nights of sleep I'd had in over a week. I'm not sure if it's completely gone. I'll be back tonight, and I'll post an update tomorrow if anything happens. Any advice on how to identify what this is or communicate with it safely would be genuinely appreciated. Story number 4. I was about 6 or 7 years old. My mom and I were doing our usual grocery run at the local Walmart. I remember getting out of the car and walking up to the entrance we'd parked toward the back, so it was a bit of a walk. As we approached the entrance, there was a homeless man out front asking people for spare change. The woman ahead of us told him no, and he immediately started mocking her and saying rude things. My mom and I hurried past him to avoid the confrontation because he seemed really agitated. We went inside, got everything we needed, and it all seemed fine. When we were loading up the car and getting ready to leave, my mom pulled out $2 to give to him separately. He was probably still at the entrance. I tried to talk her out of it. I wanted us to just hand it over quickly and leave, like a drop and go, so we wouldn't end up on the receiving end of what happened to the woman before us. When we walked back out, I reached up for my mom the way little kids do when they want to be picked up, because I was anxious about running into him again. She lifted me up, we handed him the money, and we walked away without any confrontation. I was being carried, facing backward over my mom's shoulder as we headed back to the car. We were about halfway there when I lifted my head off her shoulder and looked back. The man was staring directly at me. His face looked distorted wrong, somehow. The only word I can think of is demonic. He was grinning with his tongue hanging almost to his chest, letting out this long, hissing sound. His eyes rolled back in his head, and nobody around him seemed to notice. People were just walking past him like nothing was happening. What I still can't explain to this day is how I could hear that hiss so clearly, from that distance, like it was right next to my ear. I told myself at the time it was probably just a guy on drugs, but honestly, I think it was something else entirely. Whatever it was has stuck with me for years, and it plays a big part in how I think about the supernatural to this day. Story number 5. About 2 years ago, I took my wife, my dad, and my 3-year-old son to visit family in rural New England. They live on a small farm with buildings dating back to the 1700s, restored and modernized, along with a guest house built about 20 years ago. My cousin is a well-known photographer, and my aunt had decorated most of the rooms in both the main house and the guest house with her work. When we first arrived, none of us paid much attention to the photos. We were all pretty wiped out from the time zone difference, but the next morning, after a solid night's sleep, we were sitting in the main living room, having breakfast and planning out the day when I noticed my son kept looking down at his lap and wouldn't respond when my dad talked to him. That was unusual, even at 3. Those two were really close. I glanced over at my dad and noticed he was sitting directly in front of a photograph. It was a shot of a room inside an abandoned building, large window, sunlight streaming in, long shadows stretching across the floor toward a dark corner. The image gave me an uneasy feeling, but I didn't think much of it. We finished breakfast. Everyone got up from the table, and I noticed my son walking in a wide arc around the end of the table where my dad had been sitting. Weird, but I chalked it up to quirky 3-year-old behavior. Over the next day or so, I noticed he was getting increasingly restless during meals and going out of his way to avoid looking at the photo. I finally asked him what was going on. He answered completely matter-of-factly. The mean man in the picture is staring at me. He's cold and he isn't nice. I looked back at the photo. There was no man in it, just an empty room, but something about it made me shudder. I asked my cousin about the photo. She told me it was taken at an abandoned farm property somewhere in the rural north. It was one of my aunt's favorites, she said, but it always gave her a bad feeling too, which was why it had been moved out to the guest house. Over the following days, whenever I asked my son about the photo, he'd say things like, "The mean old man is watching me. He doesn't like me, he wants to hurt me." I was unsettled, but tried not to make too big a deal out of it. Then one evening, as we were getting ready for bed, my son tripped in the hallway for no apparent reason and started crying hard. I asked if he was okay, and through his tears he told me the mean man had hurt his leg. I checked. Sure enough, there was a large bruise on his calf, the kind that looks like it came from a blunt impact. I didn't want to frighten him further, but I asked how the man could have hurt him if he was in a picture downstairs near the dining table. His answer was enough to make me start packing immediately. He's not down there anymore. He comes up here when we go to sleep. We moved into the main house with my aunt, uncle, cousins, and their large caretaker that same night. We left shortly after, so I never got any more information about the farm where the photo was taken, but I'm convinced there was something genuinely dark attached to it. Story number 6. This happened when I was pretty young. My dad had been a pool repairman for years, and one of his longtime clients had just bought a farm. I don't remember exactly where, and asked my dad to come fix up the pool, which had been really poorly maintained by the previous owners. He was generous enough to let us tag along and said we were welcome to stay a few days and enjoy the property. We drove out there, and I was in charge of reading the map since I basically never sleep on road trips. A few days later, once my dad had finally rescued the pool, we packed up and headed home. The drive back was long. Out on those stretches of highway, it's mostly desert farmland broken up by little suburban towns. Unlike me, my mom and brothers fell asleep almost immediately, so most of the trip was just me and my dad talking or listening to music. I'm a big reader, so I had a book on my lap next to the map. It was a pretty quiet ride. I was deep into my book. I had to put it down once it got dark, because my dad only let me use the dome light for map reading. No radio signal, and my Game Boy batteries were dead. All I could do was stare out the window. That's when I spotted a very tall shadow on the rooftops. It looked like a man, wearing what seemed like a fedora or a tall pointed hat, dancing and leaping from rooftop to rooftop across a stretch of suburban houses. It reminded me of a scene from Singin' in the Rain, though I hadn't seen that movie yet at the time. It took me a moment to register that what I was seeing was not normal. The houses were spaced in a way that no person could physically jump between them like that. The thing that scared me most happened at the last house, before an open field. He seemed to turn like he could feel me watching him. He bowed, tipped his hat, and even though I couldn't see his face, I somehow knew he was smiling. And every bit of it filled me with pure dread. I looked over at my dad to see if he'd seen it, but he was focused on the road. By the time I looked back, the houses were far behind us. I never saw his face or any real detail, just a dark silhouette on the roofline. But I spent the rest of that drive terrified that it might follow us, and somehow I knew it could if it wanted to. I've never seen anything like it on any road trip since. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it, but the memory is incredibly vivid. It always comes back to me whenever I watch old school musicals, because the way it moved reminds me of those big dance numbers. Story number 7. This was back in 2015. My girlfriend and I were making dinner, and everything seemed totally normal. I had music playing from a Spotify speaker in my room while we cooked. At some point, I realized I couldn't hear it anymore. I went in and found the playlist still running, but the volume turned all the way down to 0. I figured it was a glitch, turned it back up, and went back to the kitchen. Less than 2 minutes later, no music again. This time, it was genuinely strange. I live alone. It was just the two of us, so I went back to my room. This time, the physical dial on the speaker was turned down to 1, barely audible. That threw me because it wasn't a digital bug. Someone or something had physically moved the knob. I turned it back up and headed to the kitchen. I was trying to push it out of my mind and focus on cooking when I clearly heard something moving in the recording studio next door to my room. The thought of having to deal with that instead of just enjoying a normal evening with my girlfriend was already irritating me. I asked her if she heard it, and she said no. She told me to go check. I went in and found some stuff had fallen on the floor. I figured it had just tipped over, picked it up, turned off the light, and left. We were back in the kitchen when we heard it again. This time she heard it too. I told her something was going on. She's very religious, so she told me not to worry about it. We went back into the studio, and this time the lights were on by themselves, and objects were getting knocked around. No open windows, no drafts. We searched the whole room. Before leaving, I said out loud that I was leaving the light on. We left already on edge. We hadn't even made it back to the kitchen when it started again. At this point, I was genuinely convinced we had an intruder. We ran to the studio, lights were off, and the TV was on with static. We stared at each other. I told her flat out, "This isn't normal. Something is happening. We need to do something." She suggested we pray. We went to the kitchen. She held my hands, and she said 2 prayers she knew. When we finished, something happened again. I went to check, and right outside the kitchen doorway, there was an inflatable punching bag I kept in the studio. It was just sitting there in the hallway. I had no idea how it got there, and I was genuinely shaken. I didn't know if it was something supernatural or the world's worst prank from an actual intruder. My girlfriend asked why I was just standing in the doorway. I told her not to come look. She looked anyway and screamed. I tried to calm her down. Nothing like this had ever happened in that apartment before. We were both terrified when the doorbell rang. I answered through the intercom, nothing. It rang again a minute later. Nothing again. I told her we needed to get out of there. We grabbed what we needed and walked to a nearby relative's place, a few blocks away, shaking the whole time. The street outside was completely empty. We told her everything, hands still trembling, and she believed us without question. She gave us some holy water and told us we had to go back because what happened wasn't normal. When we returned with the holy water, there was noise coming from inside. It almost sounded like a party. We opened the door and my cousin immediately started sprinkling holy water throughout the apartment. The punching bag had moved to a different spot from where we'd last seen it. Every light in the apartment was on. The speaker was blasting at full volume, and when I looked at my Spotify, it was playing a reggae playlist, the first one in the queue. I hate reggae. I don't even know how to spell it without looking it up. It was playing a genre I have never intentionally listened to in my life. I used to be skeptical of the paranormal, but after that night, I'm not anymore. And thankfully, after the holy water, nothing else ever happened in that apartment. I don't live there anymore. I threw out that punching bag, and the girlfriend from that night is now my wife. We both know what we experienced was real. Whatever these entities are, they exist, and you have to be careful. Story number 8. This was the summer I was 17. We were driving to my uncle's place, a small house near the beach, which required going through this massive stretch of forest for about an hour. It was a beautiful sunny day, light filtering through the trees. Then things got weird. My dad had turned off the music to switch on the GPS, so I was just sitting there watching the trees blur past. That's when I noticed there were no other cars on the road. No one behind us, no one ahead. I hadn't seen another vehicle in at least an hour and a half, which seemed bizarre given that this was Oregon in the middle of summer, in a pretty well-populated region. As I was staring into the tree line, I swear a gap opened up for just a few seconds, and I saw 2 men in black suits, black sunglasses, black gloves, and black shoes restraining something. Something large and covered in fur. Both men were staring directly at me. Not at the car, at me. Like they knew I was watching. I asked my dad if he saw them. He looked confused and said no, he was busy driving and watching the GPS. By the time I looked back, the trees had closed back in. I'm not someone who typically believes in weird stuff, but I genuinely cannot explain what I saw. And the creepiest part, the second we came out of that stretch of forest, traffic appeared out of nowhere. It was like stepping out of a crime scene onto a normal street. The creature wasn't thrashing or panicking, it seemed like it was already contained. That detail somehow makes it worse. Has anyone else experienced something like this? Because I still think about it, and I honestly don't know whether to blame my imagination or not. Story number 9. This started about a week ago and has happened multiple times since. First, I live alone and I don't have any pets. About a week ago, I went to bed around 2 a.m. and left my MacBook Pro completely closed on the floor. While I was lying in bed, I started hearing typing. Not cracking or settling sounds, actual keyboard typing. It went on for a few minutes, and then stopped. I was terrified, but I eventually fell asleep. The next night, I fell asleep late and woke up in the middle of the night to the same thing. I wasn't dreaming. I'm not losing my mind. It was real. I turned on the light and the typing stopped. My laptop was still closed. I turned the light back off and 10 minutes later, typing again. It went on for a long time and I nearly panicked. This has kept happening on subsequent nights, always after I've gone to sleep, sometimes shortly after I put the MacBook down, sometimes hours later in the early morning. It never happens while I am actively using it. Last night I also heard strange noises from my windows, weird howling sounds, loud banging around the window frames, and of course, the typing. I keep going back and forth between thinking some agency hacked my laptop and is searching through it, though I have absolutely nothing to hide, or that this is something paranormal. But even if someone hacked in remotely, the laptop is closed and off. How would I hear the keys? I've done some research and apparently I'm not the first person to report this. Some people have mentioned mechanical keyboards making noise at night, but I use a MacBook Pro and it's shut closed, so the keys aren't exposed to the air at all. I genuinely need help figuring out what's going on because this is destroying my sleep. Story number 10. Some of you might know that whitetail deer season is coming up this weekend. I'm a 25-year-old woman, and I've been spending a lot of time in the hunting stand with my partner lately, more than usual, because we discovered feral hogs have been tearing up our oat plots and spooking the deer away from the feeders. We've been out multiple times over the past 2 weeks trying to catch the culprits with no luck, which has been incredibly frustrating. Because of the hogs, I've been sitting in that stand after dark more than I ever have in my life. We've been out from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m., 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., 9 p.m. to 11 p.m., all kinds of odd hours. I'm bringing this up only because it might be relevant. A few things have happened that I can't easily explain, and my partner is just as stumped as I am. The first thing happened about a week and a half to 2 weeks ago, around 1 or 2 in the morning when the moon was pretty bright. I was half paying attention, had already written the night off as a bust, when I heard a strange sound, like a loud whooshing or flapping. My partner thought it came from the front left of us. I thought it came from behind. Either way, it swept past us fast. I know what drones sound like, and it wasn't a drone. Not a helicopter either. The sound was too small, if that makes sense. And it definitely wasn't a bird. Too mechanical, and it flew low, maybe just above the tree line, but we couldn't see anything. The second thing happened about a week ago. We weren't in the stand that night, but it was strange enough to mention. We live on the same property, and around 9 or 10 p.m. there was a massive, distant explosion, like heavy artillery, that rattled our house. My sister-in-law across the road called immediately to ask what the heck had just happened. Could have been a natural gas explosion, but the strangest part, my partner found a post on a local emergency management website asking about an unexplained explosion in our area in 2016 at the same time of year. We still have no idea what it was. Tonight, we were out in the stand again. It's been cold and raining all day, so everything is wet and dripping. We went out at 10, and around 10:30, I suddenly heard a strange whispering sound. My partner heard it too, though he's partially deaf, so I think he caught only part of it. To me, it sounded like muffled voices from a distance, like a group of people having a conversation just far enough away to be unintelligible. But there are no houses or structures in that direction, just trees. My partner described the sound differently. He said it was more like a low moaning, not quite like cattle, but close. We do have livestock in the area, and we hear them all the time, but there's no pasture near where the sound came from. It lasted maybe 30 seconds, gradually got slightly louder, and then just cut off. I want to emphasize that these sounds are subtle. If I hadn't been actively listening, I might have missed them. Combined with this persistent feeling I get of being watched whenever I'm out there alone in the dark, it's starting to get to me. I don't necessarily feel like I'm in danger, more like I'm being observed and noted. My gut instincts are usually pretty solid, and I try to pay attention to them. I'm curious what everyone thinks, because there might be a perfectly logical explanation for all of this. All I know is I really don't want to become just another hunter with a weird story, but I feel like I'm starting to see a pattern forming.